Thank you for a warm welcome to everyone tonight. I'd like to begin our session by acknowledging the traditional owners on the land which we practice. So Melbourne River Sangha Practice Centre is located on the Wurundjeri people, on the land of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nations. And I also know that we are practicing in many different areas in Victoria and maybe beyond. So I'd also like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which each of you are residing and practicing on tonight, wherever you may be. So we honour all elders, past, present and emerging. And may our collective practice tonight be an offering from the heart and an expression of our gratitude for our First Peoples' wisdom, spirituality and their profound connection to land, air, sea and numerous living beings. Thank you.
Bonnie, are you prepared? You ready?
I'll just unmute myself. So hello everyone. I have the guitar here and I thought I could do a Palm Village song called I Am Free, and please join in if you can. So I am a cloud, I am a blue sky, I am a bird spreading out its wings. I am a flower, I am the sunshine, I am the earth receiving a seed, and I am free when my heart is open. Yes, I am
Free when my mind is
free. Oh dear
brother,
oh dear sister, let's walk together mindfully. And I am free when my heart is open. Yes, I am free when my mind is clear. Oh dear brother, oh dear sister, let's walk together mindfully.
Thank you, Bonnie. Well, we're very lucky to have Bonnie in the Sangha because Bonnie is actually a professional artist and a teacher in music as well. So thank you, Bonnie.
Thank you.
So I'd like to invite 3 sounds of the bell. So we take the opportunity to listen to the bell, the voice of the Buddha, and go back to ourselves so that we are ready to receive the teachings from Brother Phap Hai. And if everyone could bow to Brother Phap Hai. Okay. Over to you, brother.
Sweet
dear Sangha. It's such a delight to have a chance to be together with everybody this evening. I've been looking forward to sitting with you. Originally, I was going to be there physically, but the universe had different plans. So we have a chance to be together in a different kind of a way, perhaps with even a deeper connection. I'm delighted to be here for many reasons. One of the reasons is that I've known Hui for, I think, about 20 years now, Hui, since Hui was a teenager. We were both much younger then. And I've also had a chance to practice at the Evan Buddhist Center before. I've come to the Sangha there, and to be here this evening, I'm seeing so many familiar faces that have been also gathering many evenings in what I think is going to be called the Compassionate Ocean Sangha. I'm starting to feel that it shouldn't be called the Brother Phap Hai Sangha anymore, because it's not about Brother Phap Hai. It's about the Sangha. So some people were saying we should call it the Corona Sangha, and then we said, well, Corona sounds like Karuna, which means compassion. And then my name means ocean. Why don't we call it Compassionate Ocean? So it sounds like a good name. Maybe we'll call it that. Tay always told us that the next Buddha is most likely to appear in the form of a community. And when we think of what the Buddha is made of, what the Buddha generates insight, generates compassion, generates understanding. And that's really the fruits that we want to manifest, not only in our own life, but in the life of community. Community and building community was really the masterwork of the Buddha. Very soon, almost immediately after his enlightenment, he spent a couple of weeks just really reestablishing himself in Bodh Gaya after his awakening. But the first action he took after that time was to go out and to find members of his Sangha. And he spent the rest of his life building community. So often we have this, what I call a delusion, that the teaching of the Buddha is contained just in the texts, in the sutras or commentaries and so on. But in fact, in addition to giving Dharma talks a little bit everywhere through the north of India during the 45 years of his teaching career, he also built the physical manifestation of his teachings, which is the community. And so right up until the moment he passed away, he was emphasizing the importance of the fourfold community. And so for me, even though we can't physically be together at this time during these few months, I feel that this is a very precious time. It's a time, I think, that's not going to come again in our lifetimes. It's a time of deep preparation. It's a time when, as I shared in the Compassionate Ocean Sangha a few weeks ago, it's a time when we meet a fierce teacher. Compassion has at least two faces, and one face is a very gentle face, and another face is a very fierce face. And right now we're meeting a teacher, and a teacher can come in many forms, not only in a physical form, but also in the forms of situations, or in this case, viruses. We're meeting a very fierce teacher that's taken away all of our usual ways of identifying ourselves, identifying our importance, identifying ourselves through our relationships, identifying ourselves through the nature of our work or our routines, or all of these kind of things, these layers of self-identification, or even the layers of our security. We're seeing more than ever just how fragile this thing that we call life is, and all of these deep fears are coming up. It's a very difficult time. And it's also a very precious time. It's a time, I think, that in some way that often it doesn't seem like it at the time, it's actually an incredible blessing if we know how to hold it well, if we know how to work with it well. This is a time in which we can experience some very deep transformation. I'll never forget the first time I came back to Australia after ordaining back in the year 2000. It's a long time ago now. was the year that I met Hui, and we had a kind of almost a day of mindfulness in his house when I met Harry. When I came back to Australia, I was wondering why my family was always walking 3 steps behind me. And wherever I went when I was visiting my family, we would walk and they would walk kind of behind. And so I asked them after a few days of this, I said, what's going on? And they said, well, we want to walk behind you because after you walk past people, like when you've walked past, everybody turns around to look, and it's like walking with a Hollywood star, and we just kind of want to have that experience. And I thought, yeah, it's wearing this robe. It's a robe of humility, but it's also a robe of availability, so that people, when they see us, often they feel inspired to say whatever's on their mind or to ask all kinds of questions and things. And it's great. It's what it is. It's often unexpected. I've had some very beautiful encounters over the years. I've had also some very funny ones. I remember a beautiful encounter with a woman in a supermarket in the United States. And she said, she came up to me and she started crying. She's from the Salvation Army. And she said, you know what? For so many years, I felt ashamed to wear my uniform. But when I saw you wearing your robe, I knew that I could come and speak to you immediately. So I'm going to wear my uniform after this. And so we had a beautiful conversation, about that. And then also I've had other encounters that are very interesting. Like, it was actually the same supermarket a few months later. A woman said to me, you have the cutest accent. Where are you from? I said, I'm from Australia. And she said, but you speak English really well. I said, thank you. In moments like that, you just have to say thank you and move on. But most recently, it was about 4 years ago now, I was asked to teach a class at the University of Montana. And when I was walking around the campus in the University of Montana, a young college student was coming up the other side of the road. And as he was coming up the other side of the road, he saw me and he did a double take, as a lot of people do when they see a Buddhist monk. And he came right over the road, came up to me and looked me in the eye and said, I've got a question for you. And I said, what is it? And he said, what's the meaning of life? And I thought, oh God. Now this is the question that so many of us have. What's the meaning of life then? And it's a good question. It's an important question. It's a question, I think, in some form or another that brought most of us to our spiritual life, to our spiritual practice. But I also feel it's not a very empowering way to approach that important question. I think there's a kind of a mistake when we approach the question in that way, because it kind of takes away the power from us. It puts the power in a universe outside or some divine being outside, a kind of a mindset that everything's sort of preordained somewhere. In the meditator's view, in the Buddhist view, a more empowering way and a more important way to ask that question, a more transformative way to approach that question, is to ask ourselves, how do I bring meaning to my life? How can I bring meaning to my life? How can I make this moment of my life the most beautiful, the most profound, the most deep and most wonderful moment of my life? This is the way that we approach this question. And we approach this question not only above our ears, but with our whole being in each and every moment. When Tay talks about engaged Buddhism, or when we speak about engaged Buddhism, we're not talking about going out protesting and working for civil rights and things, which are all very important things and are parts of our tradition. But most importantly, we're speaking about engaging with each and every moment of our life as our spiritual practice. It means not only the quote unquote wonderful moments, the moments in which everything's going right as we think they should, but we're talking about the moments when things are really difficult. Things are not as we think they should be. When things are hard. And for many of us, this is one of those moments. Our bodies are fantastic teachers. I often say to my students that I think our bodies are perhaps the most profound and the most wonderful teachers we'll ever have. I do an experiment with friends. I've done it all over the world, and the results are the same. When I ask people to point to their minds, people will point here. When I ask people to close their eyes and imagine that they haven't studied at all for the mathematics pop quiz that I'm giving, and I'm standing in front of the room, and I've written an equation on the board, and then I turn around and I call out a name, for example, Hui. Call out Hui's name, and then Hui says, who, me? Normally, where everybody around the world, when we're talking about ourselves and pointing to ourselves, we will point here. There's one exception, and that is in Japan, people will point here. But that's the one exception, a cultural exception. Almost everywhere around the world where I've taught this, people will point to the heart. We don't point up here. We don't say, who, me? And point here. If we did that, we'd feel like something was a little bit strange. But instinctively, we point to the center of our being. I'm sharing this partially because I want to invite you into an understanding that your body is a great teacher and that wisdom is there already, below the realm of thinking. But I also want to point out that most of the time, we are living in translation, particularly of very important terms in Buddhism. And one of those terms that we use a lot is mindfulness. Mindfulness is the English translation of the Pali word sati, or the Sanskrit word smrti. And it was mindfulness as a word was first proposed as a translation for sati by an Anglican, a Church of England pastor in 1860 something. Now that's fine, it's wonderful. However, in the West, we've grown up with quite a different sense of mind than the sense was in the original time of the Buddha. In the West, we've grown up with what we call a Cartesian split between mind and body. We're only now in the West starting to come back to the understanding of the interbeing nature of mind and body, that mind and body they inter-are. They're not one, but they're not two. They inter-are. Mind is based on the body, and body is based and interconnected with mind. In the Indian philosophy of the Buddha's time, in the Vedic Sutra, in the Vedic scripts, you see that the seat of consciousness was not seen to be the brain, as many people would believe it to be today, but it was seen to be the heart. There are many reasons for this. To put it very simply, we won't go too much in depth into the Vedic texts, but to put it very simply, if your heart stops beating, then in the Vedic way of thinking, your life ends. Nowadays, we will hear people, particularly from the Heart Math Institute and other places, remind us that the heart consists of a little over 60% neural cells. Now, what that actually means is up for debate, like most things, but on a basic level, there is now a realization in the scientific realm that there is consciousness in the heart, and the heart has its own consciousness. In a number of Asian languages, Vietnamese, Chinese, and so on, the word for, or character in the case of Chinese, for mind and heart is the same. In Vietnamese, it's tâm. You can use that for mind, you can use it for heart. You have to actually use another word or another character to distinguish whether you're talking about consciousness or you're talking about heart. In Vietnamese, it's tam tuk and is consciousness, and then tam lam is heart. It's exactly the same character. There's seen to be that interbeing nature, that understanding of consciousness and heart as one. So many of us approach our meditation practice from the top down as an intellectual exercise, with this misunderstanding of what sati is, because we're approaching it with our Western mindset, no pun intended, our Western mindset that mindfulness is an intellectual endeavor only. However, mindfulness can absolutely validly be translated as heartfulness in the original sense. And in fact, it's even closer to the original meaning of sati, which is more an embodied awareness. Mindfulness is a relaxed attention to what's taking place within and around us in every moment. And it leads into a quality, it develops naturally into a quality of centeredness that we call samadhi. Sometimes we translate it as concentration, but in Buddhist meditation or Buddhist practice, this sense of samadhi is becoming one with the object of your attention. We become one with our breath. We become one with our step. We become one with the sunshine, the trees. We become one with our happiness, one with our anger. One of the great Pali scholars of our days, Venerable Sujato, translates samadhi as immersion. And I like that very much, because in the original sense, in the Pali language, there's a sense of concentration, this deep sense of oneness with what we're doing, as plunging into a cool lake on a hot day. Or the other sense is walking through, on a very hot day, you finally come under the shade of a tree and you sit down and rest against the trunk. There's no effort there. There's just this sense of ease, this sense of delight. And so this is the sense that is really important to cultivate in this practice of mindfulness. And so I want to invite you in your practice to also cultivate a sense of heartfulness with what you're doing, to bring our attention from that very short but very long journey, that journey of life, out of our head into our heart. That's the most important journey that we can make. Mindfulness is a deep intimacy with our experience, a deep felt sense of what's happening in body and mind. And one of our greatest teachers in our Zen lineage, Master Rinzai, Master Lin Chi, or in Vietnamese is Lam Te, he said the real miracle is to walk on the earth, not to walk on the air or to walk on the water. Those are not miracles at all in Buddhism. Anybody can do that, is what Master Rinzai said. It was very difficult to shake him. Like, anybody can do that. Very few people can walk on the earth. That's the real miracle, is what Master Rinzai said. And here we are, of course, talking about walking on the earth outside, taking steps on the earth. Actually being fully present for a step is a miracle. To not go anywhere, to not be going anywhere, is already a great transformation for many. But here, I honestly believe there was another layer of his teaching, and he was asking us to walk on the earth of our experience. To walk on our lived experience, to embody our own lives and to bring our own lives to the practice. One of the greatest teachings I received as a spiritual practitioner, as a monk, was from Thayak Tan, who said to me, whatever you do in your spiritual life, don't cover things over with a whole lot of bells and incense. Be absolutely yourself. And I felt that was, like, over the years, over the past 25 years or so, that has been perhaps one of the most important teachings I've ever received. To not cover things over with a whole lot of bells and incense, but to be real. And if there's any moment in our history in which we need to be real, it's now. This is when the rubber meets the road. in this kind of mindset, in the mindset of Zen Buddhism, of bringing our whole self to the practice, it means taking the time to also honor things such as our anger, our depression, our jealousy, and to not see them as obstacles, but to see them as the flip side of wisdom, to ask them what they are calling us to bring forth into our lives in terms of healing and into the lives of others. In the Lotus Sutra, we have this beautiful, I'm a little obsessed with the Lotus Sutra. The other night I gave a talk in which I shared my transmission gatha. And so the Lotus Sutra is still very much present with me the last couple of days as I'm contemplating aspects of my transmission gatha after the talk last Sunday. In the Lotus Sutra, there's a beautiful chapter in which the Buddha appears, and in that chapter, these celestial bodhisattvas, these like superheroes, all gather around, and they say to the Buddha, we want to help you to be able to share the Dharma to everybody, to be able to liberate their hearts. And the Buddha says something surprising. The Buddha says, I don't need your help. Go back to where you came from. I have all the help that I need. And the celestial bodhisattvas, these celestial superheroes, say, what do you mean? What do you mean you have all the help that you need? There's nobody here. And then the Buddha reaches out his hand and says, look out there. In the Lotus Sutra, which was given on the Vulture Peak, I have a very visceral experience whenever I think of this, because I've been there a number of times. And the Vulture Peak looks out over a vast valley, which you can go and you can actually see the foundation of the Buddha's hut. In fact, those of us who are going to participate in the loving kindness class have a chance to see a couple of images of the foundation of the Buddha's hut. It's right at the edge of the Vulture Peak. And so I like to imagine the Buddha sitting there and gesturing out over this vast valley. And then he says, I have all the help that I need. Look out there. And then from the earth, all of these beings spring forth in this sutra from the earth. They're called the bodhisattvas from the earth. And the Buddha said these bodhisattvas are the beings that are going to bring real transformation. So if we have sharp roots, and all of us have, then we'll understand that the Buddha is talking about each one of us. The Buddha is talking about bodhisattva, the real bodhisattvas, the most transformative teachers, are those that bring forth wisdom from their own experience. I'm wondering if we can have a sound of the bell. We also seem to be having some feedback on my side, and I'm wondering if there's any audio issues on your side.
Sure, Tai, I will invite the sound of the bell, but before that, could I ask Bella to mute, please? It doesn't seem that I can mute you.
My computer's frozen. I can't.
Bella.
Can you mute me?
I can't mute you.
When it becomes unfrozen, I will click it. Sorry.
Thank you. I'll invite the bell now.
So our practice is a practice of transformation, not transcendence, not rising above and floating away on clouds somewhere, but transforming what is real, what is true in our lives, and bringing forth the wisdom from within. Master Rinzai also said that the aim of the spiritual life, the only worthy aim of the spiritual life, is to become a real human being. And that means embracing all parts of ourselves. And for me, that's also another element of engaged Buddhism, of engaging with our lives just as they are. And in our spiritual practice, we don't separate out spiritual practice and everyday life, that our practice is this thing right here. In this moment in time, most of us are experiencing lockdown of various degrees. And so this very discomfort, this change in circumstances is our actual practice. And it's very, I feel in some way we're quite privileged to be practitioners during this time, as I shared earlier, because we have tools to be able to help this time to be a very deeply nourishing and transformative time. There are some people not very far from us who are finding this excruciating. My thoughts go out to those who are in abusive relationships and are now locked in confinement with their abusers. I've been sitting and sending as much as I can, sending loving kindness and energy and thoughts in those directions. I'm also thinking of those who have mental challenges, who are now on lockdown. I'm thinking of those in physical pain. I'm thinking of those who are just don't have the resources to be able to look within. Perhaps they don't have severe mental illness at this moment in time, but they have emotional challenges and they're finding this very difficult. And when I consider those situations, I see what a privileged position I'm in. That, you know, for me, if you locked me in a room, like, and I wasn't even allowed to go outside of the room, I would be completely fine, because I will find ways to occupy myself. I enjoy sitting, I enjoy walking, all these kind of things. It's not a punishment for me. In fact, I enjoy it. I love that. But for many people, it's not like that. And perhaps even for some of us on the Zoom call tonight, it's not like that. And the thing is, it's not like that for a lot of people. There was a study done in 2014, actually a series of studies, which were quite surprising. I'm going to read excerpts from an article about this study, which I'm reading because I just think it might give some of us hope if we're having some challenging moments. It starts off by saying that in a series of 11 studies, University of Virginia psychologist Timothy Wilson and his colleagues at Harvard University found that study participants from a range of ages generally did not spend even brief periods of time alone in a room with nothing to do. The participants, by and large, enjoyed much more doing external activities such as listening to music or using a smartphone. Some even preferred to give themselves electric shocks than to sit quietly. And then the study goes on to explain that the researchers asked participants to be alone with their thoughts from periods ranging from 6 to 15 minutes. Many of the first studies involved college students who reported that this quiet period wasn't very enjoyable and that it was hard to concentrate and that they felt very agitated. So Wilson thought that that might be something specific to college students. So he conducted another study with students from a broad selection of backgrounds ranging from ages 18 to 77 and found essentially the same results. This was surprising that even older people did not show any particular fondness for being alone. Now he doesn't attribute this to the fast pace of society, but rather, or to electronic devices, but rather to people's desire to always have something to do. During several of the experiments, participants were asked to sit alone in an unadorned room at a laboratory with no cell phone, reading materials, or writing implements, and asked to spend 6 to 15 minutes entertaining themselves with their thoughts. I can spend a whole day entertaining myself with my thoughts. It's fascinating if you start to look at the stories that your mind tells you. I mean, that's what meditation is about, understanding the nature of story. Half of my family is from a Jewish background, and a couple of years ago, I was asked to share at a place called Rancho La Puerta, which is a big retreat center in the north of Mexico. I was asked to teach there every year for a number of years, and in a week called Wisdom Keepers Week. And so one year I was together with a wonderful Hasidic storyteller called Joel Ben Izzy. He's written 2 books so far. He's a professional storyteller. And so he goes around telling stories and things, wisdom stories. And he wrote his first book, which they were planning to make into a movie, is called The Beggar King and the Secret of Happiness. And I recommend it to everybody. He, as a storyteller, lost his voice. And he went through this existential crisis after he lost his voice. And this book is a beautiful story about losing your voice only to find it again in the voices of others. And it's weaved, this book is weaved throughout with wisdom stories from different traditions. But anyway, we were together during that week, and I was teaching meditation and offering Dharma talks and things. And Joel was offering his sessions, which were called Finding and Telling Our Healing Stories. So we struck up a great friendship. We spent a lot of time together, and I enjoyed his sessions so much, and he came to mine, and we're planning to do retreats together, which I think will be fantastic. And I'm looking forward to them. But he said the big difference, Phap Hai, between the Jewish tradition, you know it and I know it, is that in the Zen tradition, you want to get rid of your story too quickly. In the Jewish tradition, we hold on to the story for thousands of years, and we know that there's 100 ways to tell a story, and there's even more than 100 ways, and we need to honor those stories rather than getting rid of them too quickly. So if you find that in the next few days, like bringing your attention to your thoughts is helpful, take it a step further and start to look at the narratives that you tell yourself, because there's a lot of wisdom and a lot of interesting things there, trust me. So during these studies, they were asked to sit alone with their thoughts, just observing their thoughts, which is also the central aspect of Buddhist meditation, just sitting and observing what's happening. And then they were asked questions on how they felt after this study, and most reported that they found it difficult to concentrate, their minds wandered, although there was nothing really competing for their attention, and nobody enjoyed it. A similar result was found. They thought, well, maybe we'll let people do it at home. Maybe they're not feeling comfortable in the lab. So they let people do it at home. So similar results were found, except there was a wild card factor, and they found the third admitted that they cheated at home by engaging in some activity like listening to music or using a cell phone or leaving their chair. And they didn't enjoy the experience anymore. So they, and then they took the study further. Because most people prefer to have something to do and find it impossible to simply do nothing, to simply be there and to do nothing. Even honestly, as a meditation teacher, there's so many people who treat their meditation as something to do. It's a project. You know what I mean? I've got to do this in my meditation. I'm doing my meditation in order to get peace, to get enlightenment, to get happiness, whatever we think it might be. It becomes another thing to do rather than a realization. And then, which is a very subtle transformation of our approach. So they decided that they take it a step further, because most people prefer to have something to do rather than to just sit quietly. They asked, would they prefer to do an unpleasant activity rather than to do nothing? The results show that many would. Participants were given the same circumstances as all of the previous studies, with the added option of administering a mild electric shock to themselves by pressing a button. Now, here's where those of us who identify as female need to have a little extra compassion and empathy for the males, okay? And the males, you need to have a lot of self-love and self-compassion. 12 of 18 men in the study gave themselves at least one electric shock during the 15-minute quiet period. By comparison, only 6 of 24 females shocked themselves. All of the yeah, all of the participants had received a sample of the shock prior to the 15-minute quiet time and reported that they would pay to avoid being shocked again. But during this time of quiet, they found it so aversive, just sitting alone with their own thoughts, not doing anything, that they actually gave themselves electric shock. So basically, as we know, and we've known for 2,600 years, our mind, by its very nature, is designed to engage with the world. In fact, our mind, in the 8 Realization Sutra, it says our mind, by its very nature, is always searching outside of itself. But if it does that, it can never feel fulfilled, because the things that we think we're looking for that will fulfill us from outside, they're not outside at all, they're within ourselves. And so this transformation of consciousness from searching for something outside, whether it's another idea, whether it's another teaching, another book, another cookie, another piece of chocolate, another cup of tea, all these things, then it doesn't really satisfy what we're looking for. So this is where, as meditators, it's so important for us to have that radical shift of awareness from that seeking mind of thinking we always need one more thing and then everything's going to be okay, to understanding that our human nature, our human existence is such that we never actually get to that perfect moment, but we become okay with that. We're able to dance right in the middle of the situation. And that's what we mean by everyday life as practice, of not covering things over with a whole lot of bells and incense, of giving up hope and getting ground under our feet, of being real. And being absolutely ordinary in the Zen tradition, especially in our Rinzai tradition, in our Linqi tradition, is considered to be the highest fruit of the practice. There's even the story of the Buddha's time when one of the kings came a long distance to visit the Buddha. And when he came to the Buddha and spent the equivalent of what we would call a day of mindfulness nowadays with the Buddha, said he had a chance at the end of the day to kind of debrief with the Buddha. And the Buddha said, "How did you enjoy today?" And the king said, "Not very much." And the Buddha said, "How come?" And the king said, "Well, I was really looking forward to spending the day here, but you do the same things as we do at home. Like it's no different here." And the Buddha said, so they go through all the things. Like, of course, as most of the texts, there's a lot of repetition and things, but they go through the list of things, and the Buddha says, "Yes, that's what we do, that's what we do, that's what we do. And you do that at home, yes." And then at the end of it, the Buddha said, "That's completely correct, king, but there's one thing that we do differently to you. That when we do something, we know we do it. We do it fully, and we know we do it." So right in the very beginning times, in what we call source Buddhism, there's that teaching of the absolutely ordinary things being the extraordinary. When we walk, we know we're walking. When we sit, we know we're sitting. When we eat, we know we're eating. That each of these moments is our practice time. Everywhere we go is our meditation hall. This is the heart of engaged Buddhism. And so if we consider the Dharma as medicine, I think it's important for each of us to ask ourselves, what kind of illness do we have? What do we think we need to heal? And to make sure that we take the right kind of medicine for our own situation. If you are diabetic and you don't have heart issues and you're taking heart medication, it's not going to help your situation. And so in Buddhism, we consider that there are 84,000. It means a lot. It's a Buddhist way of saying a lot of different practices, and some of which are going to be more suitable to certain people's circumstances than others. A number of years ago, I was in a kitchen with a woman from Taiwan. Her name is Phap Hai. And like me, she loved Chinese medicine. And one morning she was cooking up some Chinese medicine. And I love the smell. And I was asking her, what are you cooking? And she said, I'm cooking up Chinese medicine. Would you like some? And I said, I would love some. So she poured a small bowl for me, and I was sipping away at it. And only after I'd had 3 or 4 sips did I ask her the important question. I said, what's this good for? And she said, women's trouble. And I realized in that moment that that was very good medicine for her. She needed that medicine. I did not need that kind of medicine at that moment in my life. I don't have those kind of issues. You know what I mean? So I need to find the kind of medicine that's necessary for my situation, for my circumstance. And it's the same way in the life of the practice. There is so many people who call themselves a practitioner or things, but don't actually really take time to consider what is it that we're practicing and why. What is it that we want to manifest? I always ask my students, what is it that you want to become? You know, it's another way of asking them, why are you a practitioner? That's one of the first questions that I often ask my students. If they ask me to be their teacher, to be their mentor, I ask them, you know, why is it that you're a practitioner? Why are you a meditator? And, you know, what brought you to meditation? Because I think it's really important to be very intentional about our practice. Otherwise, it's quite easy to fall into a dullness, a kind of a non-intentionality about our path. Why are you a meditator? And if you've been a meditator for 10, 15, 20 years, why are you still a meditator? What is it that that brought you to the path? And how has that become part of your practice now? Is that intention? Is that yearning of your heart that brought you to meditation still an aspect of your practice today? So what is it you want to become? Because many of us come to meditation with the idea that we want to become something, to become happy, to become peaceful, to become enlightened. So why don't we take a moment just to ask ourselves, you know, what is it that we want to become? And see whatever word arises. Whatever word arises, that's fine. It could be peaceful, happy, liberated. I don't know. Could be anything. And that's normally where we stop, when we ask ourselves these deep questions. What do I want to become? Or why am I a practitioner? We'll say something like, I want to be peaceful, or I want to be happy. Now, I don't want to denigrate that, because I think that's already a big step to actually, as a practitioner, to actually be intentional about these things and to ask ourselves what our motivations are. This is already something to celebrate. But it'd be a pity if we stop there, which is where most people stop. But I'd like to ask you, what if you say to me that I want to become happy? What do you mean by happiness? What's that experience for you? We have this idea that happiness is the same for everybody, or peace, or enlightenment, whatever word came up for you. What is your experience of that? Is that the same as my experience? Or, you know, most likely it's not. Each one of us, while there's some overlap, hopefully, each one of us has quite a unique sense of what peace is, what happiness is, what liberation is. It's important to understand what these things are. In Buddhism, one of the most important words to understand is a word in Pali language called bhava. It means becoming. Often you'll hear about suffering, you'll hear about happiness and things, but very few teachers are talking about becoming, which is underlying all of these tendencies. In Buddhist psychology, this tendency towards bhava, or becoming, always wanting to become something and never quite getting there, is the root of a lot of our suffering, our dissatisfaction, our issues. This sense of that we're lacking something. This sense is what gives rise to this energy which is in the dependent origination, that interdependent co-arising, called bhava, becoming. I always need to become something else rather than what I am right now. These questions are really important for us to ask ourselves over and over again. The insight that we develop in our practice life, and our practice life is about developing insight into our own situation, hopefully, rather than just being something generic, rather than not really having an intentionality. The insight we develop is really based on the questions we ask. I like to visualize it almost as if the questions that we ask, or our intentionality around our practice life and our spiritual life, are like the banks of the river that don't control the river in any way, but they hold the flow of our mind. They hold the flow of our spiritual practice, so that it flows in a certain direction. And so without that sense of intentionality, it can be very easy, as I shared earlier, to fall into a sense of dullness, complacency, or that our practice is just something generic without any juice. And this is when we fall into the category that is called in Zen a dried up papaya, with no more juice, no more joy, no more life in our practice. It's just kind of just there. You know what I mean? So I think I really want to ask you from the bottom of my heart to spend some time to ask yourself why you're a practitioner and what you want to realize through that. And this is different from setting a goal. A goal is something in the future. Intentionality is something that's realized right now. And if we do that, then we're able to recognize more and more what's in front of us. Whether it's the kind of insight that we want to manifest, or it's something as simple as happiness. It can be quite challenging sometimes to recognize that actually we have happiness available for us, or we have peace available for us right here and now, because our idea can prevent us from seeing it. In the time of the Buddha, just 2 villages away from where the Buddha woke up, the Buddha was once going on alms round, and by that time he was already a very well-known teacher. And he came on alms round, and a person came up to him, a villager, and said, so he saw the Buddha's demeanor was very peaceful and things, and came up to the Buddha and said, so what are you then? And the Buddha said, I'm a fully enlightened one, I'm a Buddha, and I'm Gautama the Buddha, And then the herdsman looked him up and down and said the ancient equivalent of whatever and walked away. He was right in front of the Buddha and was unable to recognize what's right there. So through generating these qualities of intentionality, of heartfulness, of entering deeply into our life, of understanding what we want to manifest, then we have a chance to see things more clearly. So when I was thinking about what I wanted to share tonight, these are the few things that I wanted to share, and I hope something has been useful. If not, I'm sorry about that, but it's been lovely to be together. If there's been one sentence or a word or a couple of phrases that have been useful, then it's been worthwhile. Thank you for having me. Why don't we have a sound of the bell?
Yes, Thầy. Thank you, Thầy. Can I invite Sarah Martin and our Sangha to offer a song? Oh, hang on, I'm getting something. Go ahead, Sarah.
Thank you, Hui. Hello, Sangha. I would love to share a song with you, a song that Heng and I learnt at Blue Cliff Monastery last year. It's called I Am Home, and I'd love you to join in. I'll put the lyrics right now in the chat section so you can sing along. It's a beautiful song about connecting to all the different parts of Earth within us. So you can keep your microphones on mute and then sing along with me if you'd like to. Awaken, spirit of the earth, I feel you grow in me. Awaken, spirit of the earth, I feel you grow in me. I am home. I am home. I am home. I am home. Awaken, spirit of the rain. I feel you flow in me. Awaken, spirit of the rain. I feel you flow in me. I am home. I am home. I am home. I am home. Awaken, spirit of the wind. I feel you blow in me. Awaken, spirit of the wind. I feel you blow in me. I am home. I am home. I am home. I am home. Awaken, spirit of the sun. I feel you shine in me. Awaken, spirit of the sun. I feel you shine in me. I am home. I am home. I am home. I am home. We are home. We are home. We are home. We are home. Thanks so much.
That's so beautiful. Thank you, Sarah. Was that you singing or the baby singing, or both of you were singing? Sarah?
Okay.
Yeah, thank you.
I'll share one. Thank you. I'll share one that we learned at Tai Plum Village called You Are a Buddha to Me. It's got hand actions if you'd like to join in. It's you are a Buddha to me. I am a Buddha to you. The Dharma is what we share. The Sangha is how we care. This is the way. This is the truth. This is our life. Everyone together? You are a Buddha to me. I am a Buddha to you. The Dharma is what we share. The Sangha is how we care. This is the way. This is the truth. This is our life.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. Again, thank you, Brother Phap Hai. Thank you so much from the bottom of our heart to spending time with the practitioners and different Sangha members in Melbourne. And we'll join you again tomorrow at your Zoom room. Wishing you a peaceful sleep, rest. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Hui, and everybody in Melbourne, and a couple of the Sydneyites too, who are on the call this evening for having me. It's an absolute delight to be together with everybody, to have a chance to be with new friends and to be with friends who we've known each other for decades. It really nurtures my heart. Thank you so much. And thank you all for your sincere practice. It's really so inspiring for me to have a chance to be walking this path together with all of you here in Australia. So, thank you.